Ironically, leaving the straight razor routes of Kansas for the fat part of Missouri, the roads returned to the way God intended. Following the contours of the land, easing around hills and edging rivers, riding was suddenly enjoyable again. I made my way to the Mark Twain National Forest and camped for the night before crossing the Mississippi River at Cape Girardeau the next day. A couple hours later, I'd crossed the southern tip of Illinois and pushed into Kentucky. After so much time in the West where it could take days to cross a single state, riding in 3 states in a single day felt like progress, as much as wandering without any destination allowed for progress. Around noon, I pulled into a little one-horse Kentucky town where most of the windows on Main Street were covered in newspaper and for lease signs hung in doorways. The 2009 summer of recovery had clearly skipped over this town. It was the kind of small southern town that looked like it was stuck in a time warp, and I half expected to see kids running along the street pushing hoops with sticks. I found the lone open diner, though diner was a bit of a misnomer for the place. Dive bar was probably more accurate. At one time, it had been a gas station's convenience store with an attached garage, which appeared to be the only other business in town still open. The shared building was the color of Band-Aids, with nothing indicating where the diner stopped and the garage began. To help alleviate that problem, stacks of used tires 2 stories high acted as a sort of border between the two. Inside, their shared wall was thin, with no soundproofing, and the high-pitched whine and hammering of pneumatic impact wrenches broke into the dining room where a handful of tables were scattered around the floor, and cardboard Budweiser promotions decorated the dim walls. A pool table sat in the back with a half-empty rack of bananaed cues hanging on the wall. In the front corner stood a microphone stand and heavy-duty speakers, but there was no stage, only a stretch of duct tape on the floor to separate the Friday night band from the crowd. I think I discovered where the locals came on payday to play, sing, and bleed. I could tell by the decor that this wasn't the kind of place to eat healthy, but I'd eaten so much fried, fatty food over the course of the trip that I had to try. I ordered a grilled chicken sandwich and gnawed my way through the dry, overcooked meat while the handful of other customers gorged themselves on golden brown meat nuggets, dripping grease and flavor down chins and wrists. When I finished, I handed the waitress my debit card, but she looked at it like it was some confounding artifact from the distant future. "I'm sorry, we only take cash here," she said. I wanted to ask Union or Confederate. It was 2011, and a restaurant refusing a debit card was like demanding all payment be made in gold doubloons. I had no cash on me and wondered what the penalty in this town was for doing something as crazy as trying to pay for food with a Visa card. Fortunately, the town had a bank with 20th century technology, which kept me from having to find out. Leaving my pack as collateral, I rode to the bank, picked up the cash, Union money, and returned to the diner. To be polite, while handing the waitress a $20 bill, I said, "Sorry about not having cash on me." "Oh, that's okay," she said. "It happens all the time." I wanted to say, which is probably a sign that you should invest in a card reader, but I just smiled and nodded. As she counted out my change, she said almost to herself, "I really hope it rains today." Not sure what I'd done to deserve such ill wishes, I said I was sorry. Telling a biker that you hoped it rains today roughly translated into, "I hope you have a really shitty day." Each drop hitting bare skin felt like a needle prick, and hundreds of drops would find skin in the most tame summer storm. Vision, already limited by the giant piece of Tupperware strapped to their heads, was drastically cut. Traction, which a rider depended on for stopping and steering, became difficult to judge. Rain gear, despite being bought specifically to keep water out, never lived up to its promise, and the rushing air stripped away heat through soaked clothes until you shivered on the hottest of days. For all those reasons, bikers did whatever they could to avoid riding in the rain, even if it meant hiding under a bridge like a troll. She looked at the bug-splattered helmet on the table, realized what she said, and stuttered out, No, I don't mean you. I ride a motorcycle too, and I hate riding in the rain. I just meant in general." "Oh," I said, dropping 20% on the table. "It's just we haven't had a good storm in forever," she said, still trying to explain herself. "It does look a little dry around here," I said. "Oh, I don't just want a storm for the rain." She went back to digging her hole. "I want a good one. Rain, hail, wind, lightning. I want an exciting storm, not just something to water the lawn." A couple hundred years earlier, she would have been burned at the stake as a witch. In the entire trip, I hadn't ridden through weather worse than fog and mind-numbing heat. But 10 minutes after I left the diner, dark clouds raced across the sky ahead of me. Crammed in the bottom of my pack, I carried an untested set of rain gear that appeared to be made out of the same material used to wrap houses under construction. I'd only put it on briefly once in the Oregon mountains as a windbreak against a cool morning, and had no idea how it would hold up against actual rain. As the sky ahead changed from dark to black, I questioned the wisdom of not buying a rain cover for my pack. When I was scrounging up gear for the trip, I'd avoided buying it partially because I was poor and cheap, but mostly because I refused to believe that a high-end backpacking company could sell a camping pack that wasn't fairly waterproof. It turned out they could and did. By the time this storm was done with me, water would pass through it so quickly I could have used it to strain pasta. Lightning lit up the sky in the distance, and I had a pretty good idea I was about to get soaked, but the back roads liked to taunt me. Interstates, except for a few minor curves, went in straight lines. If you were riding an interstate and saw a storm, you knew whether or not you were going to get hit by it. Route roads, like the one I was on, meandered. They wandered, east, west, north, south, curving around rivers and hills. Having never been on these roads, I had no idea what direction they'd take after the next bend. One minute, I'd be headed toward pure blue sky, and suddenly the road would bang a hard left, and the sky would look like the four horsemen were about to ride out of it. With each curve, I'd think, great, shit. Oh, that's not so bad. I'm gonna die. It might turn out okay after all. Oh, God. What a beautiful day. This is gonna hurt. Mile after mile went on like this until all the blue patches disappeared completely, leaving behind a solid black dome and the thought, this might actually suck worse than Kansas. As soon as I realized that I was going to ride through the storm, I should have found a motel and spent the night with stained sheets and fuzzy cable. Instead, I raced, hoping that I could make it to the campground at Mammoth Cave National Park before the worst weather hit. When, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I was forced to pull into a gas station, not because I needed fuel, but because the dark clouds blocked all light and I had to take off my sunglasses in order to keep riding, I should have admitted defeat. But stubbornness ran on both sides of my family, and the gas station clerk claimed that the campground was only about 10 miles away. I knew I could do 10 miles. Overconfident, I was about to throw my leg over the seat just as a flash of lightning and a clap of thunder simultaneously broke overhead. If it was true that you could tell how far away a lightning bolt struck by counting the seconds between the flash of light and clap of thunder, then that bolt should have hit me in the navel. Even knowing that, unlike a car with its metal shell, a motorcycle offered no protection if I was unlucky enough to be struck by lightning, I still refused to quit. I scrambled to put on my rain covers as a Kentuckian in a pickup truck pulled into the parking spot next to me. The driver stopped as he walked past, looked up at the sky, at me, back up at the sky, and with his head still tilted back said, "Looks like you're fixing to get wet." "Oh, is that what that sky from hell means?" I said, shaking the rain jacket out of its ball. "Good to know." He smiled and nodded. Either he didn't catch my sarcasm, or he didn't need a comeback because Mother Nature was about to have one for him. I had my rain jacket on and the boot guards covering my feet, but I still had the pants to fight with when the first drops, few in number but fat as cherries, burst on the hot pavement around me. I checked to make sure that my cell phone was shut off and stuck it back in my pocket. Trying to outrun a storm had me moving faster than I was thinking, and I didn't even bother to move my phone from my pants to the relative safety of the inside jacket pocket. Making one of the dumbest choices since hitchhiking in a kidnapper mobile, I decided it was better to save the 90 seconds it'd take to put the rain pants on and cram them back into the pack. Wearing a rain jacket but not pants was the equivalent of putting on a condom with visible holes in it, but I had tunnel vision. All I could think was that if I got moving and was heavy-handed enough on the throttle, I could beat the storm to the campground. With only the water-resistant rain jacket and booties for protection, I tore out of the parking lot. Less than a mile down the road, the rain began to fall in earnest. Heavy drops battered my face mask and smashed into my neck. My leather gloves quickly waterlogged, making it difficult to finesse the throttle, brake, and clutch. In the first minute, without even the nominal protection of water-resistant covers, my canvas pants soaked so thoroughly that it felt like I sat down fully clothed into a bathtub. Water, pushed by my speed, streamed horizontally across my face mask. Thunder and lightning cracked in rapid succession like bursts from an automatic rifle in the dark, and I'd barely broken the edge of the storm. It was at that moment, struggling to see through the rain, forcing myself to slow down to avoid hydroplaning, and wondering why I wasn't smart enough to be in a motel, that I discovered one of the many quirks of the English language. Our mother tongue was full of mystery. For instance, why was the word fun in the word funeral, and whose bright idea was it to give flammable and inflammable the same meaning? My more pressing question, as the sky dumped sheets of berry-sized raindrops, was why did all meaning vanish when the words water and resistant were combined on a piece of clothing? Water was 2 hydrogen atoms combined with 1 oxygen atom, and according to my dictionary, resistant meant a force that tends to oppose or retard motion. Logically, water-resistant clothing should have been garments that didn't allow water to easily pass through, yet somehow the water-resistant tag on my rain jacket meant nothing. Dick. Fuck all. It was the brainchild of a marketing company to sucker consumers into buying overpriced junk in the hope that it offered some level of protection. It was gibberish. It might as well have read hippopotamus knapsack. The water wasn't simply working its way into the openings at my wrists, neck, and waist. It pushed through the fabric itself, drenching everything beneath. My blanket-lined Carhartt coat, which never claimed to be water-resistant, absorbed the rain like a sponge, clinging heavy to my chest and arms. As my body, from toes to chin, took on the added weight of waterlogged cloth, my first thought went to my electronics. I didn't have many, only a cell phone and a camera. The camera was semi-protected in its carrying case in my inside jacket pocket. For it to get wet, water would have to soak through my rain jacket, coat, the protective case, and then into the camera itself. My phone, on the other hand, sat in the puddle growing in my pants front pocket. With no place to pull over and the damage already done, all I could do was hope that powering it off at the gas station was enough for it to survive. A bolt of lightning exploded so close that the smell of burnt ozone filled my helmet. I felt the thunder in my chest, erasing any concern for the phone in my pocket and replacing it with the fear that I was about to be the first person ever dumb enough to die by simultaneously getting struck by lightning and crashing a motorcycle. The rain, not so much falling as cascading in wind-driven sheets, stripped visibility to a few feet in front of my tire and made riding suicidal, but the only option worse than continuing was stopping. The road was narrow, with no turnoffs, shoulders, or even a driveway. The earth on either side fell immediately away into a drainage ditch or rose straight up an embankment, leaving no room to stop. I passed a Ford parked on the side of the road, still taking up half the lane, its headlights burning, the driver too afraid to push on. With the car's crumple-zoned steel frame, airbags, and seatbelts, it was a smart decision by whoever sat behind the wheel. If he was rear-ended by another storm-blinded driver, he'd walk away with a sore neck and maybe a black eye. All I had for protection was a helmet and useless rain gear. If I got hit, I wasn't walking away. Leaves, small branches, and other debris blew into the road. I never saw most of them, but I felt them as they crunched under my tires. With both hands on the handlebars, I hugged the double yellow, thinking it was the safest place to be. It meant being closer to oncoming traffic and getting pounded by the waves their tires spewed in high water, but there were fewer fallen limbs in the center of the road. The wind made holding that line almost impossible, blowing close to 850 pounds of bike rider and pack around like a box kite. Unable to stop and not wanting to continue, my only thought was a continuous loop of, this is going to hurt, this is going to hurt, please God don't let this hurt, this is going to hurt, this is going to hurt, please God don't let this hurt. Had I been thinking clearly, I would have added, or die instantly. As if in answer to my silent prayer, the rain stopped. It happened so abruptly that it was as if someone had shut off a shower. And then it turned to hail. When I said earlier that riding through the rain was painful, I was wrong. Rain felt downright pleasant compared to the hunks of ice smashing against me. The storm turned from terrible to so horrible that for a second I thought Jesus was back. And pissed. The sky was tar and my headlights seemed filled with ink. Nickel and dime-sized chunks of ice bounced off my chest and arms, feeling like quarters thrown from the top of the Empire State Building. They found cracks in my biker armor, hitting me in the bare wrist and catching me in the neck, burrowing their way down my back as they melted. The front tire skated on a blanket of frozen ball bearings, bouncing and skittering, pushed by the wind. The hail danced in synchronized waves across the pavement that would have been beautiful if I hadn't been concentrating so hard on not dying. This is gonna hurt. This is gonna hurt. Please, God, don't let this hurt. Larger branches, snapping off in the gusts, littered the pavement. Water had made its way inside the helmet, fogging my face shield until the clear plastic turned to milk. I slapped at the outside with one soaked glove, but it did no good. The fog was on the inside, and the road was almost invisible. I could barely make out the yellow line snaking away ahead of me. Cramming my left hand between my face and helmet, I wiped away a clear spot, but the wind and ice wouldn't allow me to ride one-handed for long, and by the time I'd returned my hand to the handlebar, the shield had already fogged solid again. Running out of options, I flipped up the visor and squinted into the storm. Hail smashed through the opening, stinging my face and blinding me as badly as the fogged plastic. I snapped the shield back down, and before my hand was back on its grip, the front tire caught a thick branch, shooting it against my foot and leg. Fortunately, I was so flush with adrenaline I barely felt it. I added, please, nothing bigger than that, to my continuous loop of, this is gonna hurt, this is going to hurt, please God, don't let this hurt. In the midst of all the lightning, wind, hail, debris, and my growing panic, a single bead of water formed dead center at the very top of the inside of my face shield. While struggling to see through the fogged plastic, I noticed it clinging to where the clear shield met the hard black plastic of the helmet. Gradually, the little bead grew fat, shaking and dancing with the vibration of the bike and the shock of the tires striking branches. Despite everything going on around me, the motion so close to my eyes naturally drew attention, and I found myself glancing up at the little drop. It clung to the shield until it had finally grown so fat that it couldn't hold on and dropped, racing down the center of my shield and leaving behind a perfectly clear lightning bolt trail through the fog. Going almost cross-eyed, I peered through that little clear path the drop had left, just in time to see a tree that had fallen across the road, directly in front of me. Tensing for the unavoidable hit, I locked my jaw, clenched the handlebars, and flexed my stomach, as ready as I could be to be mated to 20 yards of asphalt. I threw my weight hard left. There wasn't room to brake, hoping the tires wouldn't slip on the branches and melting hail, and swerved just enough to miss the main trunk, the top branches biting at my ankles and tinging off the exhaust. If it weren't for that little squiggly clear line that the water droplet had cut into my face shield, I'd never have seen the tree and would have smashed into its trunk. I'd have been thrown from the bike and at the very least broken something important. Realizing how close I'd come to seriously hurting myself, my inner mantra of this is going to hurt, please God, don't let this hurt, and nothing bigger than that, changed to I'm gonna die, please God, don't let me die in Kentucky. Why the thought of dying in Kentucky bothered me more than dying in a bloody motorcycle wreck in general was a mystery. I had nothing against the bluegrass state, and there were a million things worse than dying in Kentucky, for example, living in Kansas. I could only guess that I was scared beyond logic, and it was a miracle I hadn't regressed to thinking only in grunts. I needed to get off the bike before I got myself hurt, but there still wasn't anywhere to go. I wasn't greedy, I didn't expect a roof or shelter. All I wanted was a few square feet of gravel where I could park and wait out the storm, listening to the hail beat against my helmet without worrying about getting run over. But there were no driveways to pull into, no side roads, not even a wide, flat spot where I could park without fear of getting hit. Dumping the bike, as horrible and painful as that would be, was still a better option than being ground under the wheels of oncoming traffic. So I rode, this time not letting the fog build for more than 30 seconds at a time. Using my clutch hand to wipe away the moisture meant riding one-handed, and the storm hadn't let up any, pummeling me with gusts of wind and bursts of hail. I threw nervous glances at the trees lining the road, wondering which one would give out next. I'm gonna die, please God, don't let me die in Kentucky, I'm gonna die. Just when I couldn't take it anymore, I saw it. A big, white, Baptist church in the middle of nowhere, complete with dirt parking lot, cemetery, and sheltered picnic area with metal roof on pressure-treated lumber, covering a concrete floor and 3 rows of picnic tables running the entire 36-foot length. It was nothing special, just open air and bird shit-stained benches, but at that moment, with the hail bouncing off my hands and lightning streaking across the sky, it was beautiful. Naturally, upon seeing what would not only save me from a motorcycle accident and falling trees, but also keep me out of the rain and hail, my first thought was, I'm about to find shelter from a storm in a church? How cliché. Clearly, I'd spent too much time in writing workshops, and I should have held off on judgment, because I hadn't made it there yet, and God still had a sense of humor. The church's driveway wasn't connected directly to the road I was on. Instead, it led to a little side road which, 20 feet later, joined my road. Still, it would have been an easy turn into the gravel lot if not for a boxy 90s Japanese car blocking my way. It was obvious that the car's driver was trying to wait out the storm, but what wasn't obvious was whether the driver was a man or a woman. Through the fog and rain, all I could make out was a mullet. If I had to guess, I'd say Lady Mullet. She could have pulled off the road into the church's parking lot, forward to the stop sign at the end of the road, or back a few feet to the other side of the entrance, but instead, for a reason known only to people with the wisdom to wear a haircut that'd gone out of style when Berlin still had a concertina wire-topped concrete wall running through its heart, she decided to park blocking off all but a couple of feet of driveway. Because of the car, instead of an easy turn to safety, I had to make a hard right past her car, cut a sharp left across the back end, another left downhill past her trunk, and finally turn right, squeezing through a 3-foot gap between her car and the driveway. Even on a perfect day and on flat ground, it was an almost impossible amount of maneuvering for my 8-foot-long, 600-pound motorcycle in such a tiny space. With an uphill slope, a 50-pound pack, the 370 miles I've already ridden that day, the sheets of rain and hail, wind, and a face shield so fogged up that I couldn't tell if the car's driver was a man or a woman, there was no chance I was going to make it. Approaching the road, I hit my turn signal and said, "I need to get in that parking lot," as if she could hear me. She didn't move. With my clutch hand, I pointed at the church, my chest, and then back at the church. "Okay, please get out of the way," I said a little bit louder. She watched as I came toward her. I braked, clutched, downshifted, jerked my head toward the church like a horse shooing flies, and leaned into the first turn. "Move your car!" Her mulleted head turned to follow me, but her car stayed firmly in the way, blocking the only chance of getting out of the storm unharmed. "Get the hell out of the way!" I yelled, pulling alongside her. I couldn't see her face through the fogged helmet driving Storm in my blossoming road rage, but I imagined it stuck with the look of perpetual confusion reserved for victims of dementia, massive head trauma, and people who enjoyed hair metal. Trying to cut left around the rear of her car, the maneuvering was too much and I forgot to downshift, bogging down the engine until it stalled. The urge to kick a boot print into the car's quarter panel bubbled up. The only thing stopping me from planting my foot in the car's rear end was that I was too busy holding the bike upright, downshifting, and restarting the engine, all while trying not to roll backwards into the leaf-choked ditch behind me. Luckily for me, none of those operations required my mouth, which was free to yell, "Move your fucking car!" The car remained anchored, but the driver turned 180 degrees in her seat to watch me struggle to get around her trunk. There was no way she didn't know what I was doing, or at least understand that she was in the way. My bike, now perpendicular to the road, blocked the entire lane. I started panicking, thinking that someone would come around the corner and, with visibility as low as it was, not notice me until their rear wheels bounced off my spleen. I thought, hurry, faster, move, get going. Inside the soaked gloves, my cold, wet hands couldn't feel the clutch engage or feather the throttle, making it more likely I'd roll backward into the 2-foot deep ditch. If that happened, I wouldn't get my bike out again without a tow truck. Trying to calm myself while struggling with 18 different problems at once, I took a deep breath, gave the driver what I hoped would be one final dirty look, and failed miserably on all fronts. Revving the engine, I popped the clutch, spinning the rear tire hard on the wet, sandy asphalt and slipping it backward. The soaked leaves at the ditch's edge were like grease under my spinning wheel. The bike jerked hard left and I shot out a leg to catch it, but not quick enough. Tumbling off the seat before the bike could pin my leg beneath it, I caught myself with one hand on the pavement. The mullet, seeing me thrown to the ground, blew through the stop sign and sped off down the road. Here's the thing. I could handle the stress of the thunder, lightning, hail, rain, wind, fallen trees, and even dumping my motorcycle, which was the first time I'd ever laid it down. But seeing the driver tear away without even waiting to see whether or not I was hurt was too much. I believe the clinical terminology for what happened next is, I lost my motherfucking mind. It was the kind of anger that happened maybe once in a lifetime, and you hope that no one witnessed it because after you'd calmed down again, it seemed ridiculous and embarrassing. "Shit-eating, inbred, hockey-haired bastard bitch!" I roared, too angry to care that the words coming out of my mouth made no sense. As long as they were loud and angry sounding, they were good enough for me. I stripped off my gloves, pitching them across the ditch. Grabbing my helmet with both hands, I tried to wrench it off my head before being reminded about the strap running under my chin. The resulting red line across my neck would last for days. Garroting myself with a piece of DOT-approved headgear didn't do anything to calm my temper, and the helmet landed beyond the gloves. I was tearing at the pack straps across my chest so that I could drop kick it when a pickup truck pulled to a stop in front of me. A woman rolled down her window and a sweet southern accent asked, "Y'all need some help?" "No, I'm fine," I growled without my top and bottom molars losing contact with each other. The truck driver sped out of there before her window even had a chance to roll up. I knelt at my bike to see the damage. Luckily, if there was something lucky about dropping a motorcycle in a thunderstorm from hell, when the back tire had slipped into the ditch, the bike's frame ground out on a mound of dirt at the very edge of the trough, keeping it from rolling all the way in and saving me from another tow truck bill. There didn't seem to be any damage, so grabbing the bike by the handlebars, I wrenched it upright, punched the starter, and tore across the road into the church's parking lot, hail stinging my bare face and neck. Once my bike rested on its kickstand in relative safety, I bounded up the concrete steps leading from the gravel to the picnic shelter, ripped off my pack, and body slammed it onto the nearest table. "Fuck!" I yelled at nothing in particular. Apparently being next to a church and within feet of a cemetery did nothing to curtail my rage-induced Tourette syndrome. "Ass polyps!" I grabbed the zipper on my, quote, water-resistant jacket to begin stripping off my soaked clothes, but stopped when I noticed my helmet and gloves lying where I'd thrown them at the start of, as my mother would say, pissy fit. "Dingleberry fruitcake!" I cursed the storm before sprinting back into it to retrieve my gear. Back under the protection of the picnic area, with the sound of hail hammering against the metal roof, I sat at the end of the table seething as chunks of ice pinged off my gas tank. I should have been thankful for the shelter. I should have been stripping off my wet clothes, digging out, hopefully, somewhat dry clothes, and checking on my electronics. I should have been glad that I wasn't hurt and the bike was unharmed. But all I could do was snarl at the lightning, "Goose shit communist!" and construct a detailed fantasy about the driver that blocked the parking lot driving back down the street when a bolt of lightning strikes the pavement directly in front of the car, causing it to crash into an oak tree in front of the church, totaling the car so I could then walk up and say through a shattered window, "Ain't karma a bitch, mullet head?" It was the most elaborate fantasy I'd created since I was 13 and discovered what all those funny feelings about girls were about. After running that car accident scenario through my mind 6 or 7 times without alleviating any of my anger, I thought that maybe it was time to get a hold of my temper and worked at convincing myself to calm down. Just relax. No, I didn't get mad when I broke down in Nevada. I didn't get mad when I broke down in Colorado. I didn't even pick an argument in that shithole Kansas diner. But this deserves rage. Or you could drop the whole Hulk smash thing and start acting like a sane, reasonable adult. That damn moron almost got me killed. To be fair, at that speed it was more like seriously injured than killed. Exactly. I almost got hurt because she was too stupid to get the fuck out of the way. With people that dumb, it's no wonder they lost the war. First, I'm pretty sure Kentucky fought for the North. And second, the South didn't lose the Civil War because of some woman in a 1997 Toyota. My anger has no time for your facts. Also, no wonder they lost the war is an expression. I don't think it can count as an expression if no one else ever says it. Regardless, I could have had a broken leg and screwed up my bike. But you didn't, so why not try to be positive for once? I am positive. I'm positive that her family tree looks like a fucking telephone pole. Jesus, she had a mullet. And the hobo serial killer look that you've got going is better because you just missed hitting a tree, survived riding through one of the worst storms you've ever seen, and stumbled onto this shelter in the middle of nowhere. She saw me dump the bike and took off. That's bullshit. You've been riding for 15 days straight now, counting the time in Boise. That's 18 days living out of a pack, and this is the first you've been pissed in all that time. And the last time you went 18 days without being pissed off, you were floating in amniotic fluid. That's an exaggeration. Not by much. Why don't you drop the whole rage thing for a second and concentrate on being thankful that you're not dead? I managed to pull myself out of my funk enough to stop glaring at the storm and hop down from the table, splashing in a half-inch of freezing water. Even though the picnic shelter was bigger than most houses, the entire concrete floor was underwater from wind-blown rain and melting hail. Briefly, I wondered how bright it was to be standing in a puddle under a giant metal roof during the worst storm I'd ever seen, before realizing that there was nothing I could do about it. I found a shallow spot to stand and emptied my pack onto a table. The pack had done absolutely nothing to keep out the rain. I pulled out my extra pants, heavy with water, and tossed them on a bench where they landed with a disheartening slapping sound. The same thing happened with my t-shirts, socks, and underwear. The atlas, maps, and notebook were waterlogged and already warping, and the pamphlets from the Grand Canyon and Arches National Park were soaked into spitball consistency. I dug out everything, including my tent and cook stove, opened all the zippers, and held the pack upside down until the flood of brown water running from it slowed to a couple of drops. The lightweight sleeping bag, which had been strapped to the outside of my pack, weighed as much as a gallon of milk. Water dripped from my phone, which had somehow turned itself on in my pocket. Wanting to see if it still worked, I called my parents and got their answering machine. I was impressed that, as soaked as it was, it still ran, but my hopes fell as I left a message and random beeps and bloops sounded in my ear. Hoping to find a hand dryer in the next bathroom I came across, I powered it down and yanked the battery. Only the camera and its protective case inside my coat had survived unscathed. My spare pants were soaked and the pair I wore were drenched, giving me the option of wearing pants that either made it appear like I'd pissed myself or that I was currently pissing myself. Choosing the former, I stripped. Hiking boots, socks, rain jacket, coat, shirt, pants. About to tug off my underwear, I paused. The open-air picnic area was surrounded on two sides by lawn, one side by a church, and the final side by a cemetery. I was a Yankee in the South in need of a haircut, shave, and a shower, and I was about to strip bare ass in front of a Southern Baptist church complete with graveyard dating back to near the Civil War. I'd had better ideas, though not necessarily lately. In the interest of not getting arrested for public indecency in a churchyard, I decided that maybe it was best that I not go beyond underwear. I slid a pair of soggy pants over sodden underwear and sat on a table, twisting and wringing my clothes so that streams ran between my fingers, adding to the puddle beneath my feet. When I'd forced out as much water as I could, leaving everything manageably wet, there was nothing to do but try to relax and watch the light show. In my experience, storms as intense as this tended to blow themselves out quickly, and I guess this one couldn't last more than a half hour. 2 hours later, I was still sitting on that table, flinching at the lightning. Finally, with less than an hour of daylight left, the storm passed, leaving a blue sky and burning sun. I shoved everything back in my pack and headed for Mammoth Cave National Park. Although the storm had moved on, the roadside ditches were still fast-running streams, and small rivers flowed across the pavement. For the first time, I saw the debris in the road that a few hours earlier I'd only felt crunching under my tires and bouncing off my feet. So many branches as big around as my wrist littered the road that it looked like some terrible prehistoric bird's nest. Trees had snapped along the side of the road, their upper branches sticking into the lanes at waist height. I couldn't help but wonder how I'd managed to ride through all that half-blind. As I headed toward it, the only thing I knew about Mammoth Cave National Park, named for a massive cave system, and not for the giant hairy ancient elephant, was that it was a green splotch, like a suspicious birthmark, on my map of Kentucky. I wasn't aware of the cave's history, its title as the world's longest cave system, its status as a World Heritage Site and International Biosphere Preserve, or that it drew over 2 million visitors a year. To put that in perspective, the Grand Canyon, 23 times bigger than Mammoth, with its international fame and lock on the inspirational poster market, brought in 5 million visitors a year. Ignorant of all of those things, my only reason for stopping at the park was for the campground it offered. As it turned out, I may have been the only person in America who'd never heard of Mammoth Cave National Park. This part of Kentucky contained an untold number of caves, many of which were run as privately owned tourist attractions, but none came close to the sheer size, grandeur, and popularity of Mammoth, which first became a tourist attraction in 1816. The park was such a popular destination that underground tours ran 364 days a year, the only day off being Christmas. and park management recommended reserving spots because tours would sell out. Casting as wide a net as possible, the tours were for all ages and abilities, ranging from trips that could be completed with canes and walkers to 6.5 hour adventures that required free climbing, squeezing through 9-inch diameter gaps, and, quote, hand and knee crawls over jagged rocks and dirt. How could anyone resist? Befitting a national park of Mammoth Cave's popularity, the campground I found had all the amenities I'd come to not expect on this trip. Running water, paved parking, fully functional handicapped accessible bathrooms with electric hand dryers, manicured campsites, even a camp store and post office. At the campground entrance, I'd barely dropped my kickstand when a Jetson mobile hummed up alongside me. The park attendants patrolled the campground in awkward-looking electric buggies with plastic bubble domes that reminded me of the speedy flying cars from the Jetsons cartoon. Only they weren't fast, flying, or cool. A teenager dressed like the ranger from the old Yogi Bear cartoon sat behind the wheel. It was hard to take him seriously for two reasons. First, seeing him in that outfit, all I could think was, what's Ranger Smith doing in the Jetsons car? Won't he be missed at Jellystone? And second, he asked the dumbest questions humanly possible. I know people like to say that there was no such thing as a stupid question, but on behalf of all former teachers everywhere, I call bullshit. He stepped out from behind the steering wheel, took one look at the water still running off my pants, and said, "You get caught out in that storm?" Ideally, I would have had a clever comment about his keen powers of perception, protecting picnic baskets, but between the lack of food, overabundance of water, and my overwhelming desire to crawl into my sleeping bag and forget this day ever happened, all I managed was a grunt. "Yeah, that was a good one, all right," he scratched the back of his neck. "Was it bad on the motorcycle?" "I've had better days," I said. "I bet," he said, smiling. "You looking for a place to camp tonight?" I wasn't sure about proper etiquette. Was I supposed to bow while in the presence of the king of stupid questions? It was less than an hour to sunset. I was carrying a giant overstuffed pack with a sleeping bag tied to the outside, and I'd parked at the entrance of the campground. I decided it was best to just ignore the question. "Where you coming from?" he finally asked a valid question. "Missouri yesterday, Boise, Idaho originally." I wiped my pruned hands on my wet thighs. "And you rode all this way on a motorcycle?" "Yeah, but only because riding it seemed easier than pushing it." "I bet," he nodded and smiled. I nodded toward the ranger shack. "You guys sell firewood here?" "Oh yeah, you just have to go down to the camp store." He pointed back down the road I'd just come. "We even have dryers." I would have hugged him if we weren't in the South where that kind of thing could get you shot. I'd already made peace with the idea that in order to dry out my stuff, I'd have to sit up most of the night, holding wet clothes in front of a campfire. The idea that I could simply throw my soaked clothes in a magical box, hang out for 45 minutes, and be good to go in the morning was almost beyond my ability to comprehend. As quickly as possible, I claimed a campsite, set up my tent, dumped all the wet clothes that I wasn't wearing inside my sleeping bag, and carrying it slung over my shoulder, hiked down the road to the camp store. The store was basically just an understocked, overpriced convenience store selling Pop-Tarts, ramen noodles, and glittery shot glasses with little black bats. You know, the basic necessities for any modern-day American camping adventure. So thrilled by the thought of the dryers, I wasn't even bothered by the store's ridiculous prices. I bought shot glasses, protein bars, and a bundle of campfire wood, 16-inch long hunks of lumber that'd been rough cut and bound in shrink wrap, and giddily asked the girl behind the counter where the dryers were. She pointed out back, and I strolled around the building, still happy with the thought that in an hour I'd have an armful of warm, dry clothes and spend the night in a sleeping bag that didn't feel like someone had pissed in it. Then I turned the corner into the laundry room, and happiness fled. The dryers were a sad pair of beaten and abused machines. Past campers, trying to caution others, had scratched warnings into the lid with house keys. It was hard to tell exactly what they'd written since someone else had come along and tried to scratch out the words. But dryers suck, don't waste your, spelled Y-O-U''re, money, seemed to be the general, if grammatically incorrect idea. I didn't have much to lose, and $1 in quarters wasn't going to kill me, so I dumped everything into one machine, punched the pay slot home, and waited. The laundry room was a narrow hallway leading to the men's and women's showers. The floor was painted concrete, and other than the washing machines and dryers, the only thing in the room was a bench pressed against one wall. Sitting on the bench while my hiking boots banged around inside the dryer's drum, I studied my bare feet. They had seen better days. I had toenails long enough to be coke nails, as if I had ever been that flexible, and my toes were wrinkled and pale, like the ghosts of prunes. My big toes had thicker hair than my head, and my little toes, broken more times than I could remember, looked like a journeyman boxer's nose. The excitement of watching my feet and the steady thumping of the dryer had me on the verge of sleep when an enormous white woman, towel and soap in hand, walked through the door. Her feet were stuffed inside shower shoes that suffered way beyond their load limit, and she wore shorts that, on anyone else, would have been baggy, but on her were uncomfortably, for the viewer at least, clingy. Judging by her girth and bullfrog neck, I guessed that she was from some place where they deep fat fried vegetables. She took one look at me and her face contorted into a mask of anger and revulsion. It was the expression a cockroach must see as it scurries across a kitchen counter just before being mashed into a paste by a rolled-up magazine. Without saying a word, she spun on her heel and marched straight back out the door, leaving me confused about what just happened. 10 minutes later, she returned with what I assumed to be her husband in tow. He was about 5'5", 140 pounds, and believed wearing a shirt 2 sizes too small made his muscles bigger. His children's medium Motley Crue t-shirt might as well have been painted on. She walked into the women's shower area, and he stood in the corner glaring at me like I'd said aloud all the observations I'd just made in my head. I stood to check on my clothes. He squared his shoulders and crossed his arms. I was so tired from the ride that at first I didn't understand what he was doing. The clothes were still wet and barely warm, so I returned to the bench. He stepped past, positioning himself between me and the women's room. Finally, it hit me. He was guarding the showers. Realizing that he probably assumed I was some kind of pervert, my first thought was, I can diffuse this misunderstanding simply by starting a conversation. I can say, did you see that storm earlier today? I got caught in it on my motorcycle, and now all my stuff is soaked. So I'm stuck here waiting for the dryer to finish. Had I run into him anywhere else on my trip, I'd have done just that. But I was still getting over my encounter with Thunder Mullet, and that line of thinking was quickly followed by, or I could say, hey, big fella, I've got just as much right to be here as you, so why don't you knock off the peacock act? And if you're worried that I'm trying to get a peek at your giant wife in the shower, let me assure you that the only reason I'd have for trying to see her naked would be if I was trying to assassinate my penis. I knew which response I should choose, but with him looking at me like he was waiting for an excuse to punch me, even though he was a head shorter and 50 pounds lighter than me, and I hadn't done anything wrong, it wasn't the response I wanted to choose. Once again stuck firmly between my better and worse angels, I chose the middle path. I'd ignore him. I leaned back against the wall and crossed my legs. He crossed his arms and leaned against the door jamb. I shook my head and sat up. He moved to the center of the doorway. I wasn't sure, but I thought he was changing stances every time I moved. I decided to test my theory. I reached up with one hand and scratched my hobo beard. He rubbed his hand against his bicep. Yup, that settled it. He was playing some weird white trash shadow game with me. I decided to have some fun with him. I stood. He shifted his feet. I stretched. He puffed out his chest. I sneezed. He flinched. We went on like this for 10 minutes, him glaring at me and reacting to my every stretch and shift like we were in the midst of the world's shittiest dance battle. Despite being in a room the size of maybe 3 phone booths and him maintaining eerily intense eye contact the entire time, neither one of us ever spoke. It was weird, awkward, and also the most fun I'd had not on 2 wheels since Utah, and I could have gone on like this all night. But unfortunately, his wife came out of the women's room before I could start doing jumping jacks. She marched past with her head high in the air so she didn't have to look at me, and her husband threw one last dirty look my way before dutifully following after. The warnings carved into the dryer's lid weren't wrong. When the buzzer finally sounded, my clothes and sleeping bag were almost as wet as when I started, but at least I'd lost the little remaining daylight and gotten a stare down from a chubby chaser. My last hope was the bundle of firewood I'd purchased before the camp store closed for the night. Back at my campsite, I sliced through the shrink wrap holding the logs together and realized that there wasn't a single stick of kindling in the entire bunch. I didn't have a hatchet, and there were no twigs anywhere around my campsite. Making things worse, I didn't have newspaper to get the fire going either. What I did have was 3/4 of a gallon of 93 octane sitting in my spare fuel bottle. The sun had set long before, and the air was still damp and cool from the storm as I set the hunks of wood in the metal ring. I'd started thousands of fires in my life, because the house I grew up in had a wood stove, not because I had some deep-seated personal issues, at least none that you probably haven't figured out by now. So I knew what it took to get a fire going. I also knew that, because of the amount of moisture in the air and the lack of kindling and newspaper, there wasn't a lot of hope. With the fuel canister in hand, I looked around the campground, listening for the distinct hum of ranger buggies. All the surrounding campsites were filled with the campers wide awake inside their tents and trailers, but there wasn't a Jetson mobile in sight. I dumped some Boy Scout juice on the logs, looked around again, dumped a little more, shrugged, spilled some. By the weak light of the flashlight, I didn't notice that the gasoline had leaked under the protective fire ring and out into the ground between my shoes. I held a match in my fingers, ready to strike, when the bottle of gasoline, still open and sitting a foot from the fire ring, caught my eye. Screwing the top back on, I placed the can all the way to the other side of the campsite before coming back to the fire ring. The match had flared to life against the little abrasive strip, and once I was sure it wasn't going to blow out, I tossed it at the gas-wetted logs. Before the match had a chance to touch the wood, the gasoline fumes harumphed to life into a 3-foot ball of fire that flashed past my face and lit up the surrounding campsites. Blue and yellow flames snaked out from under the metal ring, singeing the dead pine needles between my knees, exactly where the gas can had sat a second earlier. I jumped back and patted at my pants, having come close to lighting my groin on fire. Running my fingers over my face, I checked to see if I still had eyebrows, and was pleasantly surprised to find them still attached to my forehead. As quickly as the fireball burst, it died to a small 6-inch flame, then 4, then 3, and then sputtered out as the remaining gas burned off, leaving behind logs barely blackened. My second attempt, this time with more gas and a bigger fireball, resulted in the same. I began unscrewing the gas cap for a third attempt when a neighboring trailer's outdoor light snapped on, flooding the area in artificial light as a man stepped from the RV. "What the hell is that noise?" he asked someone inside the camper as he circled his campsite with a puzzled look on his face and his head tilted toward the sky, as if he was trying to figure out where the strange flashes of light and odd harumph noises came from. I tightened the lid on the gas canister and hoped he believed in aliens. Realizing that the gasoline starter was no longer an option, I set my cook stove under 2 of the smaller logs and cranked it on high. This was a much better idea than the gasoline because instead of a fast-burning ball of fire that I couldn't control, the cook stove flame could be concentrated on a single point until the logs caught. Whining like a tiny jet engine, the blue flame danced against the underside of the wood. At 3,000 degrees, I assumed I'd have a campfire going in no time, but after 5 minutes, each log had little more than charred. Obviously, I'd been sold logs cut from the rare and deadly asbestos tree, and nothing short of a nuclear strike was going to get them burning. I checked my watch. It was almost midnight, which meant that even if I somehow managed to get a campfire going, I'd be awake until 3 in the morning trying to dry my clothes. And then I'd have to wake up the next morning, crawl through the world's largest cave system, and put another 300 plus miles in the saddle. "You win, I quit," I said aloud to the logs, Mother Nature, and God, and crawled into my damp sleeping bag inside my tent that still smelled like wet feet but had now gained the added aroma of burnt hair. Or maybe that was just me. The next morning I put on the driest clothes I could find, a very low bar, broke camp and rode down to the Mammoth Cave Visitor Center. I hadn't planned on touring the cave, mostly because I hadn't known it existed until the day before, but since I was already there, I figured I might as well. Lining the road were signs warning that no backpacks, purses, or even camera cases were allowed inside the cave, which was a problem since I had my entire life in the pack on my back and no place to leave it. I hoped that I could sweet-talk some cave worker into letting me stow it under a desk or behind a counter. Why I believed that'd work was a mystery since I'd never once successfully sweet-talked anyone into anything. Maybe I figured I was due. As I followed the driveway to the Welcome Center, I was surprised to come across a parking lot big enough to service a Walmart, my first hint that Mammoth Cave was more than just another hole in the ground. It was early in the morning and most of the spaces were empty, so I parked at the head of the lot and walked to the main entrance. The office at Mammoth Cave was huge and in the process of expanding, the construction paid for by, quote, summer of recovery money. Out front, informational displays told visitors about the cave's formation, history, and animal life, while multiple sets of glass double doors led inside to the ticket lines. I tried the doors, which rattled in their frames but refused to open. According to the hours of operation posted in the window, I was half an hour early, which explained getting such a prime parking spot. As I headed back to my bike, a fat man in a Black Sabbath t-shirt and jean shorts came toward me. He moved with a beer belly stroll where his gut led and the rest of his body followed a stride behind. It doesn't open for another half hour, I said, trying to save him the unnecessary walk as he looked like someone who didn't enjoy the activity. You look like somebody ready for some cave exploring, he said. Nah, I don't even think they'll let me in with this, I said, pointing to another sign demanding that all backpacks be left in vehicles. I'm on a cross-country motorcycle trip. Where are you from? He asked. New Hampshire, I said, but I started the trip in Boise, Idaho. New Hampshire, really? I've never met somebody from New Hampshire before. He said this with the same tone I might use if meeting someone from Saturn. We talked for a while. He told me about losing his job to the recession. I was getting closer to the job hunt that inevitably came from getting home, and his story was a rough reminder that, in the real world, a lot of jobs had evaporated and weren't coming back anytime soon. I told him about my trip hitting all the highlights. Hell's Canyon, breaking down at Area 51, the elk at the Grand Canyon, the accident. I was in the middle of telling him about riding through the hailstorm from hell when, abruptly, he called back toward a squat, heavyset woman extracting herself from an SUV. Hey, honey, come meet this fella. He says he's from New Hampshire. It was a surreal experience to tell someone about a once-in-a-lifetime adventure I was having, and the only thing he was interested in was that I was born in a state with warehouse-sized liquor stores on its freeways. It was like giving a baby a really expensive toy and watching him ignore it in order to play with the box. She shuffled over to where we stood on the sidewalk, and the man said, he's on a cross-country motorcycle trip, and he says he lives out of that pack. He pointed to the pack on my back like it was some portal to another dimension, because surely there was no way to fit everything you needed to live in something that fit on your back. And he's from New Hampshire. Are you really from New Hampshire? She asked. She looked me up and down like this might be some elaborate scam where, after convincing them I was from the exotic and distant New Hampshire, I told them I was also the prince of that great land, and if they gave me their life savings, I'd make them New England royalty. I looked at my watch and said, I think I'm going to ride around for a little while and see if I can air dry some of these clothes. It wasn't a total lie. Riding would help dry my clothes, but really, I just wanted to get away before one of them asked if they could touch me to see what people from New Hampshire felt like. After wandering for 45 minutes, long enough to dry my t-shirt and give the Black Sabbath couple a chance to go away, I rode back to the Mammoth Cave office. Even though it was barely 15 minutes past opening, the massive parking lot was half filled and a thick crowd of people milled about the entrance. I made my way back with the mob through the glass double doors and froze as the steady stream of tourists pushed against my back, jostling me toward the ticket counters. It was as if someone had taken all the people I'd seen outdoors at the Grand Canyon and Arches National Park and crammed them into a single lobby. Overweight, under-exercised people wearing oversized t-shirts and fanny packs stood shoulder to shoulder in line to get tickets so that they might move as one giant corn-fed herd into the mouth of the cave. Their voices rang against the ceiling and walls, children screaming, fathers threatening, mothers trying to get everyone to stand still long enough to snap a Christmas card picture with the woman at the information desk. After 2 weeks on the road, spending 99% of the time with no one to talk to and only accompanied by my own thoughts, it was sensory overload. I did the only thing I could. I fled. Pushing my way back through the flow of onrushing bodies, many with cameras already in hand, as if there would be something inside the foyer that they just had to remember forever, I made my way back to my motorcycle. Giving one last look at the visitor center, I pulled away, passing the caravans of SUVs and sedans that eagerly flowed in to fill the parking spaces. Leaving Mammoth Cave behind, I was disappointed I wasn't going to get to see the cave, but at least this way I didn't have to try to sweet-talk anyone.